Good evening once again. You want to start on a sweet note immediately, I guess. We start on a sweet note immediately.
Oh, well, yeah.
When I heard about Murthy Classic Library as a project, something which takes a lot of your time, I was fascinated. You come from a family which is a technology family. You are a PhD from Harvard in technology, and what has really prompted you to contribute and then grow a classic work of Indian heritage?
Great. Before I answer that, sorry. I'm just curious, how many of you have heard of this thing that we're doing, these translations? If anybody's heard. Okay, good. So most of you have not heard, so hopefully it'll be a good use of your time. So this is a non-profit. I started a couple of years ago. And what we do is we're trying to find literature, poetry, and general sort of texts about ancient India. Okay? From 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and across different languages. So Sanskrit, Old Kannada or Hade Kannada, Old Tamil, medieval Marathi, medieval Bangla, medieval Telugu, etc., etc., etc. And our goal is to translate these texts so that they become mainstream, they become accessible, and fundamentally they can be they can become a showcase for the great intellectual traditions and history of this land to us Indians and also to people across the globe. As an example, many people here or your children in cities will go to English medium schools, will study and read Shakespeare, will read Williams Wordsworth, and will read whatever else, any other famous English author. But we almost would have never read Kalidasa. Unless you either grew up as an example, in a Kannada household, like my household, where my mother made sure I read, or you went to a state school where, where Kannada was first language until maybe 8th or 10th standard, and then you would have read. And so it's very surprising that we would grow up in cities in India not knowing our own authors from our own culture, our own country, but we know English authors extremely well. I mean, of course, there's a historical reason as to why. So our aim really is to increase awareness through these books for people to discover great Indian literature, and not just from one language, multiple languages. And our goal is to do this for the next 100 years. So every year in January, we release 4 to 5 new translations, volumes. If you go to our website, murthylibrary.com, you'll see these books. You can buy these books from Amazon or from Flipkart. They cost about 300 to 400 rupees each. Perhaps less than a cup of coffee in this hotel, I imagine. And essentially these books are like time machines. You can really zoom back and see and read about, a great culture, a great civilization, a great piece of, poetry or literature or prose and so on and so forth. To give you some examples of these kinds of books that we translate, there's a Terigatha, which is the very first. It's believed to be one of the oldest poetry written by women anywhere that is still accessible to mankind. It is in Pali, that's the language that Buddhism spread in. It is from 200 BC, so it's 2,200 years old. And when you read this book, when you open these books, on the left-hand side, you'll have the original script. On the right-hand side, you'll have the translation. So you actually see the original script as well. And when you read these books, as an example, this Terigatha book, you will really get an appreciation for how women in 200 BC lived, their lives, their difficulties, their joys, why they became nuns, the painful process that they went through, sometimes, very often out of sorrow. It gives you a perspective into society, at that point in time. If people talk of Western civilization and women's rights and so on, Well, when you read the Therigatha, you'll actually see extremely empowered women in this part of the world who went through very difficult experiences, who were very empowered as well, and so on, as an example. Or another translation that we have done is Raghavanka's Harishchandra, which is, the stories of King Harishchandra as told in a poetic form. It's in medieval Kannada from roughly 800 years ago or so, roughly, with a fantastic translation done by a scholar here in Bangalore, Vanamala Vishwanatha. Or we have done Abdul Shah Latif's Risalo, which is this stunning, it's my favorite actually in the list. It's the birth of, in some sense, the cornerstone of Sindhi poetry. It's very beautiful. I don't know anything about the Sindhi language, but I learned something about Sindhi culture and language and so on by virtue of reading this book. So like this, every year, 4 to 5, it's like a perennial stream, or we hope for it to be a perennial stream. Every year, 4 to 5 new volumes. So this is the sum total of what we do. And my hope is that, everybody read these books, learn more about our own culture, civilization, and debate, discuss. And it becomes as much a part of our lives as Western literature has. So that's what the effort is.
No, thank you very much. Let's put our hands together for this lovely initiative. And it's been a learning for me, and as I'm interacting with you, I'm curious, and I can promise you the minute this interaction is out, I'll be checking that site.
Yeah, please. In fact, I would request help from everybody here. Please, for your Diwali gift this year, instead of the usual things. It's not that, by the way, we don't make a dime off this thing, just to be clear. Right? It's a non-profit. Our only goal is that we Indians, among others, read and celebrate our own culture. So please look up these books on Flipkart, Amazon. The series is called the Murthy Classical Library of India, or MCLI. It'll keep growing. Please gift these to your families and friends and relatives. In fact, if you have a Sindhi friend, gift Risalo, but also gift Raghavanka. Right? I mean, we're a country of such incredible diversity of languages and culture. Let them also learn about what our ancestors, Kannadigas, also did here. Or if you have a Tamilian friend, give them Risalo. Let them also learn, some of the great Sindhi literature and so on. So I request everybody's help here in increasing awareness, celebrating these texts, sharing with your friends and family. I mean, we are only trying to do good here. We have no agenda. So.
The part of India I come from is Rajasthan. I'm Marwadi, and we always look for best bargains. So, right? So 300 rupees, when will the next sale come?
When will the what, sorry?
Sale.
Oh, no, it's forever at 300. Okay. Yeah. In fact, you'll be pleased to know, right now, I've been trying to work out whether we can do digital versions for free. Okay. But we have some technical difficulties why it's not.
You have technical difficulties?
No, what I should say is, technology has not kept up to support a 2-page opening format. Okay. So,
which is the oldest book you've translated?
So far, the Therigatha.
Okay.
Yeah, which is from 200 BC. We've also done, for example, the Yajnavalkya, which is a treatise on dharma. If you read it, it's in some sense it's the birth of the judicial code in India. And not just judicial code, I think that's too narrow, but the way of life and code of conduct in society and so on. Again, completely different glimpse. So we have done a series of texts like this.
Okay. How do you go about choosing the book? And also, I would imagine that in India, our ancient heritage has not been preserved properly. So how do you go about translating it also?
Yeah, so these are, first I'll talk about the translations. These translations are not like, okay, Rama, just one-to-one in that way, right? It's like you read a poem in the original language. So that means as a translator, you need to know the original language and script very well. As a case in point, if anybody here understands Kannada, they'll appreciate this. But for those of you who don't, so I grew up learning to read and write, I would like to think reasonably okay, Kannada. Because my mother, among other things, also writes in Kannada, so she made sure that's the case. But I can't claim to do the same with Old Kannada, which is what we translate. So a translator for us has to be a scholar of that old language, of that classical form, right? So if they can read the original and appreciate the nuances and the beauty and the depth and the richness and all the sort of adjectives I can think of, after understanding that, they then have to write the English version of that, which has to be faithful to what the Kannada version is saying. That's actually not easy. So it's not a kind of translation that someone would give me and put in Google Translate, you hit translate, you get and you publish. No. This requires skill, it requires scholarly information, expertise, appreciation of the original language and sort of a real sort of depth of understanding. So that's the translation part. And so for that, we have translators from across the globe. We have translators from India, of course. We have translators from the UK. We have translators. In fact, I'll tell you something very interesting. We have, I went to meet a VC vice chancellor. Given all the panels I'm having, I say VC, people misunderstand. Vice chancellor of a university in Andhra. And I asked him, can you please tell me who are the 2 best or 3 best medieval Telugu scholars if I want to meet, who are alive? He told me, no, look, that previous generation, this person was great, that person was great. Unfortunately, they're all very old or no longer around. So the names he gave me, one of the names was a man named David Schulman, or not was, is a man named David Schulman. Turns out he is this Israeli man who's a professor at Hebrew University and an extraordinary and globally acknowledged, including in India, very importantly, acknowledged expert on medieval Telugu. He's come to India for years together, stayed here, lived here, and is an expert on Malayalam and Telugu. And he's written several books. So he's
an Israeli.
And he's a professor at Hebrew University. So I finally, in some context, I met him. And I said, look, I never thought someone in Israel will be interested in Telugu. Not that there's anything wrong with Telugu, it's just, I didn't know, such, our interest in our things can spread far and wide. And he was telling me why he got interested and so on. So there is this, if at all, one of the amazing things I've learned is how amazing our culture is, that there are people across the globe who want to study it. That to me is fascinating. Right? Because, for example, if you grow up in England, it must, due to all historical forces, you go around the world and you see, hey, everybody speaks English, everybody's learnt about, dress in shirt and pant and this and that, right? And so you kind of see your culture has spread. Or you see Hollywood movies spread. To me, finding our scholars, our translators in Israel, Japan, China, New Zealand, and by the way, when I say New Zealand and so on, they're not Indians in New Zealand. These are natives or rather people from New Zealand who are genuinely interested in our culture, just as we would be interested in some of the culture. America, of course, Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, France. So we have translators from across the globe who work with us on this. With regards to what texts that get picked, I have nothing to do with any of that. I'm not a scholar. I'm a consumer of this information. So we have a board of editors where basically they get proposals. The person who gives a proposal just says, here is my background as to why I have expertise or scholarship in this area. And here's my proposal of why this particular text in this language is important in the historical forces, historical reasons of its importance. And then, by and large, these things are accepted. And as long as they can maintain a high standard of scholarly translation, we accept them.
So as we speak, how many books are you looking at translating?
Oh, ideally, at least for the next 100 years. So if you do the maths, right, 4 to 5 new volumes a year, times 100. So about, good case scenario, 500 volumes in the next 100 years.
How do you maintain the objectivity? I want to go back to that same point because you mentioned that, look, it's not Rama, it's not Google translation. It's ultimately somebody's version, somebody's view, somebody's interpretation.
That's right. I can't answer that precisely because I'm not a translator. I'm not a scholar of any language in that sense. But your point is exactly right, which is it is the best efforts done by a human being using all of their knowledge to do as faithful as possible a translation, as faithful as possible a translation. But sure, there's always some subjectivity. Sometimes people may get some things wrong, and okay, it happens. As an example, we have translated, volumes of the Akbarnama. My mother loves history and she reads a lot, and so she read, I think, if I can't remember precisely, maybe 100 or about roughly 100 or 110-year-old translation of the Akbarnama. Then she read the ones that we did, and she compared the two. So I said, okay, how do they compare? Though, by the way, many of our books are not, have never been translated before. Some have been done before, but we think we can do better. So she said, when I read that 110-year-old one, it's very clear the person who translated it didn't, there's a big difference, a cultural difference between the one that's done now versus that, because maybe more time has passed, this scholar's done the translation, has spent more time on the material, etc., and so on. And so she's like, there's a subjective versus qualitative difference or improvement in the translation. So maybe over time there'll be better translations too. But at this point in time, we try and do our best.
You just mentioned to our audience that you also have a favorite. Why don't you talk about that favorite name once again? Because some of us have missed that name. And why is this book your favorite?
No, my favorites are are Risalo, because I knew nothing of Sindhi culture, Sindhi literature. I learned something new about this part of the world, attempting to read this book. And by the way, these books have beautiful introductions. Hopefully everybody here will buy these books. If you don't read the full book, I'll tell you how to cheat. Just read the introduction, at a minimum, because they're such well-written text. Because we always ask our scholars, saying, please write a very nicely written introduction that can explain to people the cultural and historical significance of this book, and some of the complexities. So for me, it was just learning something new, and also, I'm not articulate enough to tell you why poetry is beautiful, but I enjoyed reading Risalo. The second was this Terigatha. Terigatha I really enjoyed for a different reason. It was, it's like, I was telling somebody, I said, we actually invent time machines. Not invent is not the right word. We produce time machines because I felt when I read this that I had access to a time machine that told me something about lives in society as seen through the eyes of these women 2,200 years ago. And it's in Pali, and it's very old. And of course, it's not easy to read because there's a lot of pain in this book. But still, the fact that it's so old and it has this cultural significance, I really enjoyed. So to me, I'd say these two. I'll admit, by the way, I've not read all our books so far. We have produced, we're producing 4 to 5 every year, and they come out in the market. I think we have more than 20 or so at this point. I'm roughly at around 14 right now, so I'm still plodding through.
You said that one should read the introduction of Terigatha, right?
I would encourage you to read the full book, obviously, but if for any reason you can't, at least read the introduction.
On Flipkart, it would be for free, right? Introduction normally is free on Flipkarts. Not even 300 rupees.
I mean, come on, Nikunj. We are a non-profit. We're trying to do good for the country. I mean, nickel and diming us is of no value, So.
Has your mother influenced you before you pick up that project? Because she's a prolific writer. Has she played a large role there?
I mean, who in this room will say their parents didn't influence them, right? So obviously the answer is, I'll say yes. But I mean, I understand the spirit of your question. Yeah, no, very much. My mother is, of course, as perhaps some people know, my mother's a writer herself. And actually, her real secret superpower is not writing. It's her knowledge of history. More than anybody that I have met in my life, my mother's knowledge of not just Indian history. To Indian history, she will know down to the greatest level of detail of regional history and so on, but also world history and other countries and so on. It's quite remarkable. So I've been very heavily influenced by her growing up, and so I also have an interest in this. I can't claim to know as much as her, but I certainly have a strong interest.
You've read 14 books, and I'm sure you can connect the dots. What has been more like a deep understanding, about the Indian culture, Indian civilization when you read those 14 books?
I don't know about deep understanding, but I'll tell you at least what I've come to appreciate. And by the way, books are not the only way for this, but books are certainly one way. We have these Sanskrit books, we have a medieval Bangla book too. Bharat Chandra's Annada Mangal, though I'm not saying it the Bengali way, I'm sure. So when I sort of read these books, what strikes you is this incredible intellectual diversity. Language diversity, cultural diversity, intellectual diversity in this part of the world, in this land that has existed. It's my friends who read Greek or Latin talk of Greek and Latin, great. I'm not taking anything away from it. They are, of course, extraordinary languages and civilizations built around it. But when you read these, you say, hey, what would it have taken in this one common space to produce this kind of diversity? That to me is just, I marvel at that. Of course, you can experience it in other ways. Food, right, is another way, right? Marwadi food or, whatever, Karnataka food and so on. That's another way to experience diversity. For me, through these books, I appreciate the intellectual diversity, the cultural diversity of this land. That's what it reinforces.
Rohan has a flight to catch, so I'll have to end the session. But With Rohan here, I have to use the word tech. And I'm going to use it very briefly just to understand that you're translating old classics. These are available on Flipkart. Introduction is available for.
And Amazon and whatever, any on your favorite online portal.
How exactly do you think technology will play a role in the way how you would be translating books? How would you be,
I'll give you a decisive answer. Let me first, before I say it, I want to clarify what you said, what you asked. How technology will help with the actual translation.
Actual translation, how you would be able to take the message of, how would you be able to just take...
In the actual translation, technology will not help. And the reason I say that is, I have a lot more faith than many people do in the power of the human mind. Somehow there's this season for claiming machines will do everything and we will be out of jobs and this dystopian future. I'm much more optimistic for a variety of reasons it won't be that case. But in this specific case, to do this translation, as I said, it's not a one-to-one, word-to-word translation. That machines can do. Here, for example, one of our Punjabi texts is translated by a man named Christopher Shackle, who's an extraordinary Punjabi scholar who's in London. He's retired now. He spent, I think 4 or 5 decades of his life learning, teaching, and just doing research on Punjabi. When I meet Christopher Shackle and I take the sum total of his scholarly learnings of the last 40 or 50 years, as a technical person, I can't begin to think how I get a machine to emulate him. So I don't think in the translation part we'll use technology. Yeah, sure, we use Word and all that, but that's not, though Christopher Shackle may be even using a quill, I don't know. But not in that area. But I think in terms of distribution and so on and consumption, for sure, down the line there'll be better platforms. Maybe one day we will indeed be online and maybe my dream is it should become, even that 300 rupees Nikunj, I don't even have that question. So even that we'll make free one day. But, I don't think, by the way, that's the reason why, that's not a barrier as of today, I would say in many cases. So.
I ask questions for a living. I've been doing this for the last 20 years and sometimes when I ask the questions I get mixed answers, some political answers, but Rohan's been very frank and all the questions I've asked, I think the answers have just bowled me away with the kind of good work he's doing. Let's put our hands together for Rohan and the work he's doing. And I'll be going to this library, checking this book, so what, there for 300, it's for us.
If I may add a plea, I always end with a plea. Thank you, Nikunj, I appreciate it. To all the people here, right, I actually usually don't accept any public speaking things because I just want to do my technical work. But the only time that I accept is to talk about this library thing. And not because I think there's no for-profit intention, there's no agenda. I've actually a very sort of different view of where we as a civilization are, our country. If I look at the range of my friends, many of whom are scholars, I don't believe we are, quickly replenishing the great generation of Indian scholars, of Indian culture and languages that we have lost. We've lost because people become old and die and so on. It's a natural part of it. Instead, we have produced people like me, like many others, right, where, glasses, only do computer science, that kind of stuff, right? I represent a very common stereotype. Or doctors, lawyers, etc., etc. Nothing wrong with that. But the flip side of that is that my big worry is, let's say in 50 to 100 years from now, you take my own mother tongue, the old form, Hale Kannada. I really worry whether that will become as alien as perhaps many other countries' languages are to our own people. Because who's learning this anymore? Which university teaches this anymore? Where do undergraduate students studying engineering or law or medicine read this anymore? Who grows up saying, I want to be a Hale Kannada scholar? Almost none in my generation. Or if there are people younger than me in our generation. That to me is very scary. Because, knowledge and culture is built up over, it's like evolution. Evolution doesn't happen overnight, right? It's trial and error and it's built up over eons. And I keep worrying whether we have reached a point where we no longer can save some of these things. I'm not talking of, for example, just to be clear, not contemporary Kannada as an example, because I still think many people read and write and so on. I'm talking of the old forms. Similarly, maybe medieval Marathi or whatever else. That I really worry about. And in my own opinion, sometimes I feel that loss of access is happening so rapidly that is it already too late? That it's inevitable, right? I mean, just to give you a sense, let's just do some basic maths, right? We are doing 14 languages, we are translating, right? Old Kannada, Tamil, etc., Sanskrit, etc., etc. Assume, just for sake of discussion, in each language, there are 1 million books of literature, poetry. By the way, when you go to Sanskrit, million is not the right number. It's probably hundreds of millions or some such crazy number. But let's just say, just conservatively, 1 million books. Right? I'm deliberately taking a low number. So that means you have 14 million books in a corpus. At our scale, even though despite putting in whatever money and trying our best and pulling all these scholars from India and across the globe, we can at best, due to quality control reasons, do only 4 to 5 books a year. In 100 years, you're around 500. So 500 divided by 14 million is 0. Despite our own best intentions, yes, we will save a couple, we will celebrate a couple, but it by no means is enough. 500 books alone, in that, even if you assume 500 by 14, some uniform distribution of, for each language you'll have some roughly same number of books, let's assume even do that. Okay, we have saved a few books in each language, but even that is not enough. So in my opinion, the crisis that we face with our classical languages is something far deeper than we as a society seem to understand. I find people are, I have to say, to our friends in the media, to various other forums, the things that people are so concerned about. We invented rockets in Vedas. Arey man, forget all that. First of all, that's not true. We have done other great things. We have actually produced extraordinary literature the rest of the world can learn from. Why don't we spend our time, effort, and debate and money and so on worrying about these things and saving them? Otherwise, in 50 years from now, we will become foreigners to our own cultures. Or we will have some Bollywood, Shollywood, and all this stuff. I mean, not that it's bad. Of course, that's to be celebrated. There are valuable things there. But there will be no depth of this historical sort of thing. It's like I read some quote somewhere saying, in India is the one place where you don't need to make up history. You have to just read it. Because it's just there. And so my appeal that I always leave people with is, hopefully today I've said something to you that's of some interest, that has given you some ideas. Please do read our books, and not just our books. Encourage your friends, family members to not just these books, but any other books like this, these kinds of efforts, to embrace them. Ultimately, it's the fate of our own sort of ancestry and history is left in our hands. And of course, there'll be people outside India who will read these things, but you'll never have huge mass. As an example, I just let you know, from what I know, today I know at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, many of these universities, because I get faculty emailing me saying, oh, we're so glad to have these books. We use these books for our undergraduate students. Earlier on, they would read only Greek and Latin. Now we're making sure they also read. By the way, we're reading this Tarigatha book, we're reading this Sanskrit book, we're reading an old Kannada book. These are students from across the globe who are reading our texts. But I almost never get this from any Indian faculty member in India. I don't understand.
So you're saying that these books are actually read by students in Harvard, US University.
Yeah.
So
and faculty members saying, hey, I'm making it a compulsory part of my syllabus. When, last whatever, so many years, people would only read Greek and Latin. Now they're reading Raghavanka along with Greek and Latin. I mean, how wonderful. That's great. But how about us reading our own thing? But I almost never hear from anyone, except maybe one professor wrote to me saying, if I just take the text and make it freely available, will I get sued for copyright? I said, you please do it. If Harvard comes after you, I will protect you and defend you. But please pirate these books. I'll be very happy. Because if somebody pirates your books, it's the best tribute, right? They're saying, oh, I love your book so much that I'll sell it for $10 rupees on the footpath. Great. But sadly enough, I don't find enough of an understanding and appreciation. Maybe there is understanding, but not enough of an appreciation for this within India. And I really worry. I worry that 50 years, all this stuff we will lose.
But it's resisted saying that, this is a sign of parochialism, or what users say learning Kumauni or Marathi, wouldn't you rather learn French or Japanese?
It's a very good question. I completely disagree with that point of view. Unfortunately, it's a post-colonial view. Yes, we need to learn English because English is the way of the world. We can't change that, right? Fine, we'll put that aside. But having said that, the point that you made is extremely important. When I say I disagree, I don't disagree with what you said. I agree with what you said, but I disagree with people who say that. Because, if you grow up in Karnataka, I do believe, at least as a second language, people should learn Kannada. You grow up in wherever else, you should learn, in Tamil Nadu, you should learn Tamil. And this idea that I'll grow up here, but I'll learn English, you want to learn French on top of it, learn, no problem. But it cannot be at the cost of your own mother tongue. And it is not parochial to say, if you live in a certain part of the country, you should know that language. Because the same people, if they live in France, will learn French. And it'll be pretty cool to learn French and to speak French, to sound sexy when you speak French, that's okay. But what's wrong in learning Kannada? What's wrong in learning Tamil, right? Or Marathi or whatever else and so on. So to me, this is a mindset issue. That somehow, I think it's a post-colonial thing, that we somehow think, it's not cool to learn the local language, which I think is not okay. Because all that will happen is, we'll be a nation of speaking English and French and German or whatever, and we won't know any of our languages. And that is an irreparable loss.
Which is what happened to Sanskrit.
Well, I don't want to say battle for Sanskrit is lost. I would not say that. It's perhaps still there. We still have some institutions. We have to do a better job, for sure. In fact, if my friend Manjul Bhargava, who is this very well-known mathematician, the Fields medalist, was just on this government committee for redoing some higher education policies and so on. So he and I, debate and discuss very often. I was telling him, saying, if it were left to me, one of the things I would say is make as part of education policy mandatory that no matter where you're in the country, you have to learn that local state language, the classical form. And as an alternate, if you don't want to learn that, you learn Sanskrit. Because it is the root language. Now, it has nothing to do with some religion and this and that people immediately start, fighting out about and politicizing. Because Sanskrit is a root language for many languages. That is a fact. It's as much a fact as science is. And that has nothing to do with faith. So I was saying to him, if I were you, Manjul, instead of imposing, not that that's what he was saying, but one, saying it should only be Hindi or only be Tamil or whatever, you're in different parts of the country, learn that language, but make that learning mandatory. I think that's a very reasonable ask, which, by the way, if you're in France, people accept. If you're in Germany, people learn and they accept. Right? So it's like I recently saw that somebody was commented, why does the Indian PM, though I should be careful, I don't talk about politics, not speak in English, even though he knows English? Well, why not? I mean, the French Prime Minister, is standing next to the British Prime Minister and speaking only in French. And the guy very well knows English. That's okay. Right? Or the Japanese PM, the same thing. So there's nothing wrong. I think it is cool. I don't know how to make it mainstream cool for people to know their own mother tongue and study local languages. Maybe if all these Bollywood people started learning, maybe we learn. I don't know. But
okay. I know you have a flight to catch. Do you have time for another question? Maybe I can open up the floor or... Sorry, I don't know. Okay, just let's check it up. Okay, I think we'll have to wrap it up. And, I'm just going to take this comment when Rohan said, look at what society has produced, people like me. But don't trust me, all the girls in the room would say you're very cute and handsome. So no problems on that. But everybody in this room will agree and say that the kind of work what you're doing, I think is full of passion. It's extraordinary. You're trying to preserve the culture. So thank you very much. And thank you for your time. I know you have a flight to catch and you squeeze this interaction. So big thank you for that. Thank you very much.